Welcome to the Inside EcoDevo podcast, where we highlight economic development happening in the state of Missouri. I'm your host, Eric Thurman, with the Missouri Department of Economic Development. On this episode, we're speaking with Doug Hermes, Statewide Planning Coordinator with the Missouri Association of Council of Governments. Doug, welcome.
Eric, thank you. I really appreciate this opportunity.
Yeah, I think you're maybe our second partner kind of agency person to come in that's going to give us a perspective outside of DED proper, which we're really excited to hear those perspectives. So I'm glad that you're here and we can dive into economic development from your perspective.
Very good, very good.
Let's start with the Missouri Association of Council of Governments, also known as MACOG. For those who don't know what that is, never heard of it, what is MACOG? What do you guys do?
MACOG is the statewide organization of all of Missouri's 19 regional planning commissions. So that includes Mid-America Regional Council in Kansas City, East-West Gateway Council of Governments in St. Louis, and we have 17 others that cover the entire state. They're organizations that were created by the state and then by proclamation from the governor upon petition from local governments formally established. And many of them were celebrating their 50th year anniversaries the last couple of years.
Okay. Is this and this might be a question that's a little out of your purview, but is this typical for most states to have an entity like this spread out across the state that does like economic development assistance and things of that nature?
It's typical that regional planning agencies, such as the individual regional planning commissions, are established across the country, again, under different states and different statutory priorities and purposes. Economic development is a primary role. I will say with a lot of pride that the state of Missouri has one of the most active and comprehensive regional planning commission networks. And that's indicative through just the establishment of a statewide association and the collaboration that they're able to do.
Gotcha. Yeah, I didn't know. I was just wondering if Missouri was unique in its establishment of MACOG or if it was kind of universal, I guess, across states. So what would you say that MACOG's main area of focus is? Like, what are you guys tasked with doing specifically?
Well, the state association is tasked with helping to coordinate common activities across all of the regions. So all of the regions are governed by their board of directors, which it comprises mostly local government leadership. So as we like to say, regional planning commissions are owned and operated by their local governments within the regions. So they establish priorities, the types of planning activities, service, support that is provided by regional planning commissions. But there are common elements that all of them do, and especially those common programmatic efforts in partnership with our what we call our state and federal partner agencies, such as the Department of Economic Development. Under the Department of Commerce Economic Development Administration Partnership Planning Program, they are federally designated economic development districts, which means the federal government treats them as the primary level of economic development coordination for the region. That is why they're suggesting to the state, encouraging and then providing funding for the state, let's adopt statewide economic development strategy that aligns with, as fed by and aligns with the regional CEDS. Because we're already doing it at the regional level. Let's all get on the same page here. They established this back in the 60s, where the Economic Development Administration determined that it's really more effective. We get more value of targeting our federal investments at a regional level. And now a lot of agencies say that. Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean like a local jurisdiction won't get their piece of that, but saying, come together as a region, decide this. I think if you look at regional economic development kind of in that same fashion, in a rural economic development district, rural regional planning commission area, they all have their individual priorities within local jurisdictions, a city or a county. But they also recognize, well, it's a county next door gets chosen for the location of a large fabrication manufacturing plant. We're still going to get some benefit out of that because people are going to come live here. People are going to come shop here that work at the plant. So we recognize the benefit and value from a regional perspective.
Gotcha. I might get this number wrong, but I think at the top you said there's 19 regional planning commissions. So does that mean that there's also 19 economic development districts? Do they go hand in hand when there's one, there's the other?
That is a more recent result. It took a number of years and coordination with MACOG and the Economic Development Administration for all of the regional planning commissions to reach their federal designation as an economic development district. So currently 18 of the 19 are federally designated economic development districts. The St. Louis region currently is not. There are other organizations within the St. Louis region that provide economic development planning, coordination, and support. And right now, they are in the process of applying for their federal designation. So they will ultimately, those other organizations together, and they will ultimately then bring economic development district designations to cover the entire state.
One of the big things that's happening right now in our department statewide is the planning for the statewide CEDS. When it comes to MACOG, like what role are you guys playing in that, if any, whether that's, statewide or just at the regional level?
It's very exciting, for one, that the state is updating their economic development strategy. It's been a while. It's also exciting the way they're going about doing it. They received some funding support from the United States Department of Commerce Economic Development Administration to do a variety of activities, and one of those activities was planning. And the leadership within the department identified the priority of updating the state strategy. Along with that identification, they determined that the best way to do a state plan and strategy was from the ground up. And so they want to engage with all of the regions and local stakeholders, find out what are the priorities that we're seeing down at the municipal and the county and the regional level. And that's where the Missouri's regional planning commissions come into play. And through MACOG, as the state association, we can help coordinate how the department then engages with all of the regions, which in turn, the regions engage with their local stakeholders. So we're actually seeing priorities that are identified at the local level, elevated up, and ultimately incorporated in some fashion in the statewide strategy.
Is there any commonalities that you're seeing across the regions of things that they are wanting to see included into? I know there's a lot of work still going on. There's, the final document, if you will, of the statewide CEDS is not complete. There's still a lot of work going on, but with the work that's been happening, what have you guys been seeing that is going to be the direction?
That's a great question. I think that the state has taken a very comprehensive approach on how they're developing their statewide strategy. And one of those approaches is working with MACOG as the state association of all the Missouri Regional Planning Commissions to review all of the regional comprehensive economic development strategies and identify where there are common elements with either across the state or by particular sections of the state, and also common elements that may come out through the planning process itself. We conducted a Qualtrics survey to help the regions input the data, the process, and the plan objectives and action steps within that survey, able to analyze that and then identifying what those themes are. And I will tell you a couple of them. It's very common across the state to recognize that in terms of economic development and other community development issues, there's a challenge in housing. And this is common in urban areas and rural areas. And it's common in North Missouri and South Missouri. And it's something that through this planning process is recognized as having an impact on economic development opportunities, particularly as it relates to workforce housing and being able to provide for housing facilities and amenities for a labor force that could help stimulate additional economic activity and stimulate marketplace. So housing is a common issue across the state related to economic development, the challenges in the provision of child care. Now, you wouldn't think that would be an economic development issue. And in fact, when you talk to some of our economic development support agencies, like the department, but also Economic Development Administration at the federal level, that's not a priority that they see for public investment for their programs. So we recognize the citizens and the communities in our state are recognizing that as an economic development issue. So we're going to see in the statewide CEDS some suggestions on how that could be addressed in an economic development framework. So it's going to be very fascinating.
Yeah. As I mentioned, and I'm sure I'll mention again a couple of times, that work's still ongoing, nothing's set in stone, but any solutions popping up? Talk about solutions to some of the issues that you listed, things that are standing out that are potential solutions to the housing, to the child care, probably some other issues that we have yet to discuss.
Sure. The regions, as I mentioned, develop their regional comprehensive economic development strategy. So we'll call those the RCEDS. And those, in that planning process, they identify what the challenges are that they have to economic development and growth. If it is housing, then they will identify some particular strategies that they as a region, not just the Regional Planning Commission, or not just one community, not just one county, but together as a region can help address. Some of the strategies we're seeing in terms of housing involve some very active partnerships with our current housing support agencies within the state, again, including the department, Missouri Housing Development Commission, some of the agencies that could provide funding support for different housing programs, United States Department of Agriculture, Rural Development, as well as direct housing programs that could be initiated at the regional level to spur development opportunities or development activity. Some of the regions identified land use planning and zoning to be used more as an incentive to help spur those opportunities. Again, trying to address what the regions themselves see as a challenge and an obstacle in certain ways. Childcare, a little more involved because different agencies partner agencies would be engaged, and different private organizations and private partners would be brought to the table as well.
So a lot of avenues to find these solutions is what I'm hearing. With the RCEDS, we'll stick with the alphabet soup there, a lot of those around DED. When it comes to the RCEDS, the regional CEDS, how does a statewide CEDS support what they're already doing? If they have their kind of plan in place, this is what we're going to do for our region, how does a statewide version of that further their work in economic development?
So you have to recognize the tremendous benefit of the alignment of local, regional, and state priorities. If everybody is on the same page with what we're trying to accomplish as a state, we're going to see an increased level of value and production out of any sort of public investment or policy priority implementation at the state or regional or local level. So what I think the local economic development organizations are going to see is greater opportunity in accessing public resources to help implement programs. They're going to see greater opportunity for the partnerships in general at the state level. And it's not just with the Department of Economic Development, because the statewide comprehensive economic development strategy encompasses all of the state at every level. So we're trying to align the state's priority within DED and the various divisions within the department, but also the other state departments. So when we know we're making investments into a certain programmatic area or infrastructure area, it's all going toward advancing our common economic development goals.
How much of a task is that alignment? When you have, we're at the end of the day, if you're working in economic development, your goal is to help your region, help your state, help your community prosper in economic development. So if we're all moving in a prosperous direction, we're probably all kind of on the same road, but they might be slightly different path than one, southeast to north or what have you. How much of a task is it to align all of those so we're all moving in the same direction and being successful together?
It's very challenging, I would say. And probably that is why the state has not updated the state strategy in quite some time, because it takes a concerted effort to bring together all the state level interest, again, the agencies and departments, but to make that local outreach and engagement through the regional planning commissions and through the local jurisdictions. So we may have on the face of it common goals of growth, development, business activity, but we will see with a new state strategy, we're diving into the details, and we're identifying what industry clusters we could focus on in what regions of the state, what's been a previous economic engine for a particular region of our state, and can we help bring that back? And when that occurs, what are the ancillary development opportunities that are going to come? So you could see some local jurisdictions getting direct benefit, new business activity, new growth, new investment, and that's going to carry over into adjacent areas. And the same is true in addressing the challenges that are needed to be addressed in terms of economic development. In terms of housing, it's not just providing housing opportunities within a particular jurisdiction to attract a particular manufacturing facility. It's providing those housing opportunities in a variety of ways within the region, because that's where the employment and labor force is going to be drawn from. And if it's all under the policy umbrella of a state strategy and we're all aligned, it's just going to make it that much easier. A very difficult task. It's going to make it that much easier to implement and see the results.
But how does one make sure that it's equitable for all regions, where you have maybe a more rural region that doesn't have as many resources to kind of dedicate to their strategy versus a big metro area that has tons of resources and knows how to, I wouldn't say game the system, but knows how to work and use the strategy to their best benefit? How do you make sure that strategy is equitable and useful to everyone across the state in the variety of ways that it can be used?
Oh, exactly. No, that's a great question. And first off, that is going to be a priority focus from the state strategy perspective. They want to make sure that what they're identifying as the opportunities and implementation action steps, that is going to be beneficial across the state. The other opportunities is through our regional planning commission network. Our membership includes our two major metropolitan areas. It includes the regional planning commissions that have the metropolitan areas of Jefferson City and Columbia, Springfield, Cape Girardeau, St. Joseph, but also all the rural areas of the state. So doing it and approaching it in a collaborative way is going to help ensure that the development opportunities, the implementation, and the action steps are going to benefit all the regions.
I'm sure you probably have some perspective on this, because CEDS is not a new thing. It's, the idea of having a CEDS has been around. We had one, we haven't updated it. Region areas have their own. How do you ensure that a plan that you make is actually actionable, that it doesn't, we go through all of this and go, okay, great, we have this document. Now it's collecting dust on a shelf. How do we make sure that it's being used, that it's useful, and that it actually is used in the right, proper way?
That question is very close to my profession and my priority. So I'm a professional urban regional planner, and I teach city planning at university. And it's critical, number one, that the planning process is truly community driven, the widest range of outreach and engagement as possible. So planning priorities, planning action steps, implementation steps are truly reflective of what the jurisdiction wants to see. Again, be it at the local, regional, or statewide level. The other major factor is that your goals and objectives can be met. It's realistic. You've identified what your resources are, what your challenges and obstacles may be, and your action steps of how to implement and bring the results you want. So it's critical that all of those things take place through the planning process, and then recognizing that a plan, be it the statewide strategy or these regional RCEDs or your local economic development plan, is a living document, and it changes over time. And you could recognize that maybe federal priorities have changed. So federal funding resources may not be available to the degree we need to act upon a certain priority. So we sit back and reevaluate. We don't wait 10 years. We don't wait 20 years. We do it when we know we need to pivot. And in today's economic world, in today's fiscal environment of public resources, ever evolving at different levels of government, we need to be more nimble. And I think through this process, that's an expectation. So if we find some barriers, we're not able to act upon priorities or strategies that are identified, then we need to gather the stakeholders again and reevaluate. And I will say, as part of the engagement the department has with MACOG and Missouri's Regional Planning Commissions, we intend to take that survey of their regional CEDS and conduct that annually, especially in terms of implementation. So what has changed? Have you tried to take action on these priorities? Did they succeed? Or is it still in process? Or did you find that that was an action that wasn't going to happen? And again, you need to pivot and brainstorm the other approaches to address your issues.
Like you said, a living document. It's going to change and fluctuate as needed, as solutions are checked off, as new issues spring to life that could not have been foreseen. Perhaps it's adjustable, it's flexible. It's not, well, we wrote the paragraph, now that's what we're sticking with. You got to be flexible, like as you say.
As every good plan, you need to be driven by your common goals and objectives, what you're trying to achieve. But when you recognize that there may be better ways to do it, or if you recognize what we tried already has not worked, then you need to have that flexibility in order to bring those new approaches to the table.
Anything standing out so far through Missouri's process? Anything that's catching your eye that you're like, oh, that's interesting, or that'll be something that we follow up on? Anything standing out to you from your perspective?
Yes, a few things. One in particular, critical minerals and mineral extraction, natural resource extraction. We already know the value of natural resources, particularly some of the natural resource elements in the southern part of our state. But we have a rich history in mining and accessing minerals, and there appears to be an opportunity that Missouri could explore that impacts a number of the regions to take advantage of critical mineral resources. And that is not the type of activity that you just try to attract one business to come in and do. It's a whole industry sector or cluster. And I think that's fascinating in today's environment of technology and the actual global economic situation with critical minerals extraction and processing. That could be quite beneficial. But that's been identified at the regional level. It was identified in our university system. And already steps have been taken to explore those opportunities, expand the current mining activities that we have in that regard. And Missouri's regional planning commissions in those areas are, as well as the department, are key partners in those efforts.
So Southwest, we know a lot of mining, a lot of opportunity there. If we go maybe north, maybe east-west, St. Louis, Kansas City, anything popping out in those sections?
Again, there's I think a great reaction to some of the evolving trends in our energy, alternative energy sources, but also technology and research. Obviously, in our metropolitan areas, we find key elements of finance and real estate, those types of industrial business sector activities. One of the common elements that would not surprise you or our listeners today is that agriculture remains a prominent key base industry for our state. That means a lot to the regions, both the rural and urban areas. And when we're talking and exploring at the regional level options of addressing housing or new development sites, those regions and local stakeholders balance that with the fact of all of that activity impacts our agricultural land. And so we have to balance those priorities of additional development activity with its impact upon the availability of productive agricultural land.
So we've been speaking about CEDS and how MACOG is partnering there with figuring out the statewide CEDS. I want to take it back just a little bit. At the top, I introduced you as the Statewide Planning Coordinator. Can you tell us about that position? Like, what are you tasked with? Just for listeners who may not have ever heard of a statewide planning coordinator, what does a statewide planning coordinator do? I'm sure that's a loaded question because I'm sure you're tasked with a lot.
The position is tasked with a lot because there's a lot that the Regional Planning Commission Network does. The state association created a position as statewide planning coordinator that they wish to work directly with state, federal, and public partners that want to implement programmatic and service activities across our entire network. So a great example is working very closely with our Department of Transportation in providing the local consultation that is needed in transportation planning, helping the local jurisdictions and stakeholders and citizens identify their transportation needs, bring them up to a regional level and prioritize them at the regional level, feed that information and recommendation to at the state level, where ultimately our Highway and Transportation Commission will adopt transportation improvement plans. But it's fed from the ground up. It's grassroots. It's planning at its very basic form, the most democratic. The statewide planning coordinator then helps organize all of the regional planning commissions to conduct those activities in a common way and at a common standard and expectation. So we do that with we do those activities with the Department of Transportation, Department of Public Safety, in the past with the Department of Natural Resources, Department of Conservation. Our network through the Partnership Planning Program with the Department of Commerce, Economic Development Administration ties in directly then with how we coordinate our activities in economic development planning, but also implementation with the Department of Economic Development. So the statewide planning coordinator helps bring all those together and helps coordinate them.
So you've seen probably a lot of projects coming in because if you're coordinating on such a wide scale, there's probably a lot you've seen, a lot you've assisted with. Is there anything, I won't put a timeline on it, but anything from your time as statewide planning coordinator that stands out to you as like big wins for Missouri?
Big wins for Missouri. I think many of them. After the terrible events of 9/11 and the federal government, and one of the largest expansions of government in our history, decided we needed to make some public investment to improve our security. And they provided funding resources to the states to develop programs and activities and investments to increase our security of our homeland. At the time, the Department of Public Safety reached out to MACOG and Missouri's Regional Planning Commission Network and asked us to help develop a regionalization framework for how to gain local and regional stakeholder input on priorities for how we could utilize those public investments to strengthen our security and safety. And so we've established regional homeland security oversight committees representing a variety of public safety stakeholders and local jurisdictions. And they come together and identify the priorities they need as a region. And then the state considers those, and through the Department of Public Safety, Office of Homeland Security, can provide funding resources, help purchase equipment, resources, help do training exercises. Been a tremendous success for our state. We were one of the first in the country to organize in that fashion. And it was a model that was used throughout the United States.
Wow.
And we're very proud of being a part of that still to this day, even with the more limited resources that are available. But we could see the results of that almost on a daily basis of how that planning process works and how we could see those investments and the value brought to our state.
It's really fascinating to me when I sit down, and I think this episode is going to be episode 46 or something like that. So not a massive amount of episodes, but we've covered quite a bit of ground. And it always surprises me that economic development, like if I think maybe the average person would think economics, money, that's business, that's what it's about. But it kind of bleeds out across a lot of different things. There's a lot of overlap that impacts economic development and makes it successful or not. In your time and the breadth of experience that you have, can you kind of put some words to that idea of economic development, how connected it is to a lot of different facets in the state and in just kind of businesses and things beyond that?
Oh, it's a wonderful point, but it's highly interrelated. So it's part of the community development framework, if you will. So for successful economic development, growth and development of a community, region, or the state, you have to address a number of different social, environmental, infrastructure-related matters. That's why a state strategy is so critical, that it doesn't just come from the Department of Economic Development, but it touches on all of the state departments and agencies. You will have social service needs. You will have health and human service requirements. You will have infrastructure needs. So the different state departments, the different federal partners that we can engage in are going to be critical in making sure that economic development strategies and priorities are a success. When you take a look at economic development at the local level, it becomes really apparent that as development activity occurs, you're going to have impacts on infrastructure, on streets. You're going to have impacts on sanitary sewer systems, water distribution networks, water treatment plants. You're going to have impacts on your housing stock. And again, the example of childcare. And as well as those impacts, you're going to have positive outcomes in terms of new employment, higher levels of disposable income, more economic activity in your downtown Main Street. And it's all interrelated, and it's all part of creating a community environment and a quality of life that people want, expect, and the people deserve.
I guess it would be fair and safe to say if normal life is disrupted, meaning the water isn't flowing, the streets can't be driven on, people can't get to work, a laundry list of things. If normal life is disrupted, the economy is disrupted. The road has not been repaired, so people can't drive into the town to shop. Business doesn't have power. They can't provide service. People can't have somebody watch the kid. They can't go to work. It all seems to feed into economic development.
It does. And adequate health care. I like your transportation examples, but it's not just like road surface. It's not just roads and bridges. It's being able to access health care by having transit. It's being able to grow older with a job or not in your residence and being able to leave your house for a doctor's appointment or even leave your house and go see your grandchildren at their high school play. And all of those things matter together in terms of a quality of life that we want to have in our communities. For those things to happen, you need economic activity. So it provides those services, provides opportunity for consumer activity, and then that generates resources that the local governments can use to provide what people expect to see.
Yeah.
It's all interrelated.
You were mentioning that big effort after 9/11 to do the security and all of that. When it comes to that kind of level of work and being involved, is there anything that stands out to you as a personal achievement? I mean, maybe that's one. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but any kind of project or anything that you've been associated with that it's kind of like a hallmark to you where you're like, that one's going up on the shelf. I'll always remember that one.
Not really. I'm very proud of all the work of my professional background and experience that I've accomplished. I guess the biggest value to me in what I do as a city planner and the organizations that I work with is what it brings to residents, what it brings to the citizens, what it brings to your neighbors. Honestly, that's the biggest thrill for me, to see planning projects, be they small developments at a city level or major statewide initiatives, and you can see and recognize the benefit and value that you're bringing. And people can recognize that too in terms of government that they participate in and help identify where they're going. These public resources, our tax dollars, are going. And then they see, well, this is what I've asked for. And they're addressing it. And they're doing it for Homeland Security. They're doing it for transportation in our state. They're doing it for natural resources. They're looking at what the stakeholders, what the citizens want and need. And that's how public investment decisions are being made these days. And to me, that makes me proud to be part of the planning profession and part of the Regional Planning Commission system.
I feel like we've covered a lot. We've talked about MACOG. We've talked about what a regional planning coordinator does, or statewide planning coordinator does. We talked a lot about CEDS. Anything that we didn't cover when it comes to MACOG, CEDS, economic development in general that you think listeners might want to know about that we did not cover?
I'd like to mention the Department of Economic Development provides really vital support to local jurisdictions across the state, as well as statewide initiatives to help grow and develop our economies. And many of those programs provide funding support through federal dollars that come down to the state and other resources. And the regional planning commissions work very closely with the department in helping local jurisdictions access those funding programs. A most common program is community development block grants through the department, and local jurisdictions can apply for different projects and activities that promote community development, promote economic development, and the regional planning commissions are there for them to help them access those dollars. If you ever take a look at the reports of what those investments do in our state, you'll be absolutely impressed. It's a tremendous value-added program, along with the others that the department administers, and they're so important for our communities and our regions. But seeing the regional planning commissions in their role of supporting their local governments to access those programs and working in partnership with DED and the various divisions to bring those resources down to the local level. It's wonderful to see.
Well, Doug, I feel like I could mine a plethora of information out of you when it comes to economic development. I don't want to keep you here too long. Hopefully, we can have you back on a future episode and go into some more really detailed, interesting things when it comes to economic development. Thank you so much for sitting down with me and speaking, and hopefully our listeners get something out of what we've talked about today.
Eric, thank you very much. I really enjoyed this, and I'd be happy to return someday.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Inside Eco Devo. We have great episodes coming your way every 2 weeks, so be sure to subscribe. Also, we want to hear from you, our listeners. Tell us what economic development topics you want to hear more about. This helps us fulfill our motto of helping Missourians prosper by bringing content to our listeners that they want to hear. Leave a comment on an episode or send an email to ded.communications@ded.mo.gov, and stay tuned for more Inside Eco Devo.